record now. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Today's talk title is Male-Female Sexuality from the Vedic way. And we're going to be trying to glean on various sources of information that Radha Bhakti and I have looked at over time, and we'll try to share you those sources. Obviously, we won't be able to get into details of so many, things we want to talk about because this is a multiple part session, which we hopefully can expand upon in the future. But starting this, because we did an initial version, we wanted to kind of augment in that version and maybe add a few more things. So there will be things that we reiterate from the previous session. So just before we get started, we always just want to ask for a blessing. So I'll just go ahead and lead us. Om Gyantimiranatsya Gyananjanashlakaya Chaksu Unvitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So again, thank you so much. We're hoping to be of service to everyone, that we could speak something that's not only beneficial for everyone, but also is going to elevate and purify all of us that are listening and speaking as well. So again, for those of you that may have not met me before, my name is Rasesh Madhava, and I live in Toronto right now, currently working as a pediatrician. And I'm really happy to tell you that I came into Krishna consciousness, for those that are from London, when I was in London back in 2005. Although I'd been introduced to Bhakti by my mom and family members when I was younger, it really took off when I was in London that year. So really, it's such a fabulous, amazing, inspiring story. And I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll let Radha Bhakti just say something quickly about herself as well.
Now we want to hear your fabulous, inspiring story. But so Haribol, everybody, and thanks again for having us. My name is Radha Bhakti Devidasi, also from Toronto, Canada, currently living in New York, living with my husband, working in management consulting in a field called organizational effectiveness. And yeah, again, just very grateful to Ananda Madhav and Malvika for having us. Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we just jump right into it? Before we get started, in terms of the sources of information that we've taken from for this talk, there are a couple of brahmacharis and sannyasis that speak extensively on male-female psychology. For those of you who may want to know, we're happy to share things in the future. But Tir Kadamba Prabhu, if you look him up, he's a brahmachari who has extensively talked about this topic. And he has learned specifically from the sannyasi that's spoken most extensively about this is Bhaktivedanta Purnaswami. And also Mahatma Prabhu also speaks very much about this topic of masculine and feminine psychology and perspective. We also feel that it's important to integrate secular sources as well. So things like men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We've touched upon. I know that Radha Bhakti has looked at things like Psychology Today, Live Science. There's also another really great book I'll show you, again, also by John Gray. It's called Conscious Men, and it's also a great read as well that I recommend. So why don't we just go ahead, and I know Radha Bhakti will get us started, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Raseshwar. I also wanted to say that for the purpose of today, we're going to be focusing on straight men and straight women, because we totally accept and acknowledge that there are lots of things in between, and we certainly don't want to exclude anyone. The research that we've come across and that we'll focus on today, again, focuses on straight men and straight women, but we'd love to hear other perspectives as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. First kind of point that we wanted to establish is that there are, in fact, innate differences between men and women. And while that might seem obvious to some of you or maybe all of you, in the world today, there is so much resistance to this idea that there are fundamental differences between men and women. And it's primarily because of the rise of feminism. And when we think about feminism, in the name of equality, there are a lot of people who are trying to deny, again, the differences between men and women. And when we think about feminism and any other ism that arises in the material world, and Prabhupada refers to these in many of his purports, these isms are often born from oppression. So there is a particular group, in this case, women. So there's a particular group who have been exploited, they've been abused, and gradually and eventually there comes a point of maybe consciousness, we could call it, or awareness, and that group and the allies of that group kind of rise up, and there becomes an uproar. And in order to kind of fight for equality and fight for the rights or the same rights as the oppressors. And so it becomes a battle to kind of prove something. And it makes complete sense. And we're seeing that today in the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's important, and it's great, and it's good to fight that good fight. Now that said, as devotees and aspiring practitioners of Bhakti Yoga, it's also really important that we kind of monitor the extent to which we get involved in these isms, because if we're not careful and if we're not sensitive, we can go very deeply into the bodily consciousness, and this can impede our spiritual progress. So I want to be really clear. I'm certainly not an anti-feminist. I'm, definitely not anti-Black Lives Matter. I think these are all very important. But again, we just have to use our intelligence to ensure that we're not getting so engrossed to the extent that it impedes our spiritual progress. I wanted to tell you all about a panel that we recently had at work where people were speaking about the idea of self-promotion. So again, I work in consulting, and self-promotion is kind of integral in order to climb up the corporate ladder. And so we were speaking about self-promotion and how it's difficult for many people. And particularly, it tends to be difficult for people who come from Eastern religions and backgrounds, because in those traditions, we're often taught about humility and the importance of having a respect for authority. And in this panel, this group of people were trying to coach everyone to promote despite these obstacles that might be there. And the point that I wanted to bring up was, do we have to mold ourselves to fit a particular environment, or is it better to create an environment where people of all backgrounds and all kinds of qualities can thrive? And again, not just survive, but thrive. So what is the right answer there? Is it that we should all mold and kind of suppress some of those natural qualities that we have, like humility and like respect for authority, for those of us who might have that from our upbringings, or should we change that about ourselves? And so it's kind of the same point that applies here today, what we're going to talk about, because often, again, we get so hung up on the idea of equality that we begin to deny and suppress our differences that might actually be helpful and that might actually be complementary of other characteristics and traits. So in this way, we wanted to start by again, talking about some of the innate differences between men and women. So some of these are gross and some of them are subtle, but as an example, based on the research, men tend to have more upper body strength. Women have greater life expectancy. Men and women apparently assign different meanings to some of the same words, which I thought was fascinating. Women have better use of both hemispheres of the brain, and men and women have different conditionings with which they see the world. So all of that said, some of the statements that we read in Shastra can be very confronting, and for me as well. So some of those statements include women need protection, women are less intelligent, unscrupulous men have a tendency to exploit women. So when I was first reading, so I feel like I am a Prabhupada girl. Whatever he says, I accept fully. But that doesn't mean that those statements didn't almost kind of hurt my feelings even. And I had to think about, why would Prabhupada say that? And it's not true. There are women who are super intelligent. There are women who are leading countries and companies. And I'm personally, kind of ambitious in my material career. And I don't think I'm unintelligent. I certainly don't think I'm the smartest person in the world, but, I was feeling kind of hurt by these statements. And these are kind of pieces of evidence that prove that women are not unintelligent. So what did Prabhupada mean by that? And so sometimes the Shastric viewpoint doesn't match our experience of the world. And so in an effort to be loyal to Prabhupada because I just love him and trust him and believe everything that he says, I was thinking about, when we're reading Shastra, Lakshmi Muni Prabhu and others have always kind of taught us that when we're reading Shastra, we have to think about every single sentence, every single line. Why was this written? How is this applicable to the world? How is this applicable to my life personally? And how would I teach this to others? So in that spirit, let's put our best foot forward, even if it's confronting, and really try to look at these statements and sincerely try to understand them. So Raseshwara and I, again, we've compiled some thoughts from other lectures that we've heard, books that we've read, and we're going to kind of take you through our thought process as we've digested these and tell you how we've kind of understood these statements.
Raseshwara. Thanks. So the first principle that we wanted to share with you is this principle of Purusha and Prakriti that you may have seen in the Bhagavad Gita. And so Purusha Prakriti, Prabhupada explains in a couple of different ways in different scenarios. But specifically, Purusha can be translated to be one who is the controller, or the one who is the enjoyer. And Prakriti, on the other hand, is the one who is controlled, or the one who enjoys, right? Now, we see this principle when we say masculine and feminine principles. That just refers to a specific energy. It doesn't refer to masculine always applies to men, and feminine always applies to females. So let's give an example of that. For example, when we say that, just to go back on that first for a second, is that in the spiritual world, we're in fact all Prakriti, and Krishna is the only Purusha. So he's the only male. And in fact, whether you are male or female body, we're in fact all Prakriti or feminine, right? Now, and what that means is that Krishna is the only Purusha, the one who enjoys, and our identity is one who's always to be enjoyed by Krishna. And what that means is that we're meant to be of service to the Supreme, or to the Purusha. And that's where our happiness comes from. So incorporating this principle, when we apply it to, and because it's a principle is one that we could take and apply to different scenarios. So for example, let's take the relationship of a husband and wife. One may see, okay, masculine, feminine, that's easy to see. But now let's look at the example of a mother and a son, right? Now, can everyone just type into the box there, in this specific situation, who is Purusha between a mother and a son, and who is Prakriti? Go ahead and please just type out what your thoughts are, if anyone has any. If you wanted to raise your hand, that's fine too, and you can just go out and you can speak. But we just wanted to get everyone to think about that. Does anyone have anything to share or to write? Someone can go ahead if they want to.
Amit says the mother is Purusha. Palak agrees.
Right. Perfect.
Malvika says Prakriti is the mother.
Prakriti is the mother. And so, okay. And Malvika, I'm just curious why did you say that the mother is Prakriti?
I don't actually know whether that's right, but I was just thinking, because the mother is always actually thinking like what I can do to serve the child, like how I can best take care of the child, what I can do to serve the child, how can I make sure that the child is well cared of. So because the mother is constantly in that mindset, that's why I was thinking, because she's in constant service to make sure that the child is okay.
Yeah, no, that's good. And one of the features of the masculine principle is that of giving protection. So in this specific example, the mother actually takes on the Purusha, or the masculine, and the child takes on the feminine, because they're the ones who the world centers around. They're the ones who are enjoying. They're the ones that are receiving the protection, but they also have the power. Now, a second example would be a student and a teacher, So just take a second to think about that. In this situation, who is Purusha, who is Prakriti? If anyone wants to just, speak out, no problem. Does anyone have any thoughts? Right. Exactly. Right. So in this specific situation, again, the teacher is the Purusha and the student is Prakriti. Again, because the principle is that the the masculine principle is to lead, to set up the environment, to control, and to control in that way. And so that is the masculine principle. And again, here the student is the feminine principle. I'm only displaying this because to not just particular to male and female, we can extrapolate this into other relationships as well. So then going on to the purpose of why this is a tremendous thing is because the Purusha energy, in fact, wants to, it wants to offer protection, and then the Prakriti energy, it wants to be of service. So what's beautiful about this is that when protection is offered, service is inspired. And not only is it just a one way, then the person who's serving wants to protect, and then the person who's providing protection also wants to serve, right? So by having both, they both, in one sense, lead, but then they also serve each other to increase and inspire the other. So just then moving on to the other principle that we wanted to introduce is this, the masculine and feminine principle of control and power. So we understand that control is Prabhupada would often refer to as a control as the source of energy, and the power in fact means energy, right? So what we can see in this situation, like if we wanted to have a simple example, if we looked at like an electric power generator, that is creating, that is the source of the energy, and the electricity that's produced, that's the energy, and that provides the power, right? So that's feminine. So again, just a situation here. Now, when we see the concept of control, I think oftentimes it can be misrepresented but it doesn't in fact refer to controlling the other individual. In the masculine principle, it refers to controlling having the environment, and then B, also the masculine principle is being control of oneself, right? So even if we took this simple example, and let's say we looked at a mother and a child, when the mother is in the position of being the controller, they establish the environment, but they're also responsible to be, and they also have responsibility to control of themselves and control their senses. So again, these are principles that we can extrapolate to other situations as well. And so in this specific context, if we looked at it male and female specifically, the male will create the environment, but what happens in that environment is in fact up to the female because they possess the power, right? And we can very much see this between a relationship. If we look simply at the relationship of Radha and Krishna as well, Krishna specifically, the other aspect of masculine is that the masculine is always leading. So what I mean by leading is that if we want to see another quality of in another individual, it means that we'll take the first step to exemplify that first. So how we see this in Krishna and Radha is that Krishna, if there is some sort of dispute, he'll always be the first to take the humble position and apologize. And in that way, Radharani is then inspired to also do the same and to serve, right? So again, that masculine principle again here is that one who's leading. If we want to see, and it doesn't mean that the feminine can't do that, but it's in that it's the nature of the masculine to lead. Does anyone have any specific thoughts or anything that came up, questions that came up in that regard from what we
I just want to remind on that front that we're not necessarily speaking about men and women, but it's rather the masculine position and the feminine position in the relationship. So we talked about how a mother can be in the masculine position. We talked about like even a woman can have masculine qualities. So this isn't necessarily man and woman as much as it is, to your point, the energetic, the masculine energy and the feminine energy.
Right. Yeah. And I wanted to use the other examples to specifically show that the masculine principles can apply to someone like a mother, right? Or someone who could be a teacher. And even I thought about, even for myself in my experience context, like you could look at a healthcare provider and a patient, right? That also has an element of Purusha and Prakriti as well, or someone who has a control and someone who has a power. Now, controlling, what does that look like in a healthy, in a healthy way? It means that there is chivalry. It means that it involves emotional support for someone who has power. How may that look in a healthy way? See, the power, many people in the Vedic understanding, the female has a power, but that power is to inspire, right? So that power comes in giving practical support, in validating, in encouraging, and by doing those things, then we also inspire the masculine, right? So again, we're not, I think when people look at this topic, they may think of it as just applying to the male-female relationship, which may be more of Madhurya or in the context of a loving relationship. But we see that, it depends on the context of the relationship. Radha Bhakti, anything else to add?
No, please continue.
So even if we now then extrapolate this and look at what would be considered Western science or the conception of Western relationships, this is also something that's talked about in books like Men Are From Mars, We Are From Venus, and other sources of that nature, where it says the natural inclination of a woman is to want to be protected and to be led, right? And so that does not mean that she cannot lead herself, because if we look specifically at the Bhagavad Gita, if people have the Bhagavad Gita, they can open it. But specifically, there's a couple of there's a couple of sections specifically that list out the male and female qualities. And the reason I just wanted to kind of reiterate them is because we have a Shastric source for specific things that we're saying, but also it also gives us a point to think about, okay, while there are differences, it doesn't mean that they're exclusive. It just means when we explain these is that if we want to think about it in terms of ratio, right? There's a greater ratio of this quality in a male or female, but it doesn't mean that it's exclusive to one or the other. So I'm just looking for, so we look at this Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 10:34, he specifically talks about the feminine opulences or qualities. So he specifically says that there are Shri, so it's fortune, Kirti, which is fame, Vak, which is fine speech, intelligence, Meda, steadfastness, Dhriti, and patience, Sama. So again, these are all tremendous qualities that Krishna specifically says in the Bhagavad Gita are feminine qualities, right? But now we know clearly that they're balanced, they can be balanced out, and then you can see it in the male. Versus if we turn then to 1842 in the Bhagavad Gita, here Krishna specifically talks about the masculine qualities, which are sense control, honesty, humility, knowledge, wisdom, purity, peacefulness, austerity, and tolerance. Now, again, these are all fantastic qualities that, again, we're all striving for. And ultimately, as we come to understand that as we progress in spiritual life, the point of spiritual life is to be balanced. And so that means that whatever for the men, it's not that we see that the feminine qualities are something, okay, this is just for them. It's something we're also aspiring for, because although they're in greater ratio for women and they have a natural tendency, these are also important for our development. And similarly for the feminine side, important for their development, again, for that balance. Radha Bhakti, did you want to follow on that?
Sure. I'm just going to say that I just want to recognize that maybe some of that was confronting. So talking about how, you know, it's natural for a woman to want to feel protected and to take lead. I just want to acknowledge that that might be confronting for some of us, and just kind of keep that in your mind, because I hope we're going to continue to address that as the talk goes on. But if not, then please hold us to account and let's talk about it during the Q&A. But I hope that we're going to address it. Rasishra, do you want me to continue?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about how society defines a definition of masculine and feminine. So Rasishwar spoke about how the concept of masculine and feminine originates in the spiritual world. But then, as we know, and as we've read multiple times, everything that is in the spiritual world exists in the material world as a perverted reflection. And that is also the case with the terms masculine and feminine, and the concepts of being masculine and feminine. So for example, we currently live in a society where to be masculine means to be a little unemotional. It means to maybe have a great body. Maybe it means have a great car. Maybe it means have the ability to attract lots of women. It means to have a lot of money. You know, you guys see where I'm going. Like, the definition of masculine means to be tough, to have a tough exterior, and so on. The definition of feminine, I don't even know if I could tell you, because it seems to be a bit of everything. It seems to be that a woman should be thin. A woman should be curvy. A woman should be humble. A woman should be feisty. A woman should be sweet. A woman should be angry. A woman should be whatever she wants. And it's confusing. I think one of the consistent things that society tells us as women, and sorry if this sounds like super cliche, but I think everywhere we look and we go, as women, we are being told that our value is equated to how physically attractive we are. And that is true in advertisements. It's true in the way we speak to each other. It's embedded in the TV and the movies that we associate with in ways that are so subtle and unconscious that we don't even realize that we're adopting the same value system. And so what happens is that the world ends up making women and girls promiscuous in gross and subtle ways because we feel that our value is in being attractive. And if we're not conscious of that, and if we don't have people to help us be conscious of that, we can fall into some very dangerous traps. I can tell you that I have a background in marketing, and when you learn how to make a positioning statement for any kind of product, so for example, I always give the example of like a razor blade. The way you compose a positioning statement is you define the target audience. So you say, to all women between 18 and 34, this particular brand of razor blades, and you say is the, and then you decide the category, and then you say the reason. So the reason it's going to be helpful. So to all women ages 13 to 34, these razor blades are the cosmetic product that are going to make you feel attractive to the opposite sex because of our whatever technology. And so that one emotional hook always tends to revolve around attraction to the opposite sex. And you'll see in all of our shastras, Prabhupada speaks about this a lot, that the sexual energy makes the world go round. And it doesn't mean that it's gross. It's actually very, very subtle. So what happens is that because we are kind of, it's so unconscious, we're just constantly being bombarded. I mean, even right now before this call, I had to think about how does my hair look and how does my skin look? And I'm lucky that there's good sunlight today, so you can't see the blemishes on my face, but it's just kind of a way that we as women are often programmed. It's like, that's the first thing I think of. It's like, let me test my video before anybody else can see me, because I'm conditioned to feel that way. I'm not proud of it, but it's definitely how I feel. So I think that, again, because of these conceptions, men are often punished for being feminine. So for example, being vulnerable or expressing your feelings as a man makes you be viewed upon as weak. And similarly, women are punished for exhibiting their feminine qualities as well. So as an example, at work, you'll often hear, or maybe you'll see it in movies, or I work in the corporate world, so I see it a lot, is that you walk in there and you negotiate your salary the way that a man would. Don't say no. You go do what the guys are going to do because you know that they're going to get what they want because they just ask for it. And in subtle ways, we're asked to suppress our femininity, our feminine qualities, because those are not the qualities that are awarded or rewarded. And going back to my point about the self-promotion bit, do we want to live in a society where we have to mold ourselves and suppress certain qualities? Or do we want to live in an environment where we can thrive regardless of our qualities, like vulnerability and other characteristics that are deemed to be or categorized in the feminine category? So actually, Bhakti Tirtha Swami says that the whole world is being deprived of our feminine characteristics, and as a result, our relationships are suffering, the planet is suffering, and the world as a whole is suffering. So what happens sometimes is that, or often, is that because we are teaching men and women these ideas of masculine and feminine, we're actually building insecure people. So for example, if a man is kind of brought up to understand that the definition of masculine means to be tough, it means to be attractive, it means to have a big car and all of these things, then those become his goals in life. He basically wants to become rich or wants to, to acquire material things and ultimately to attract the opposite sex. And then what happens is that we're not building boys and men who are strong internally because we're asking them to suppress and not deal with any of their emotions. So what happens is that externally they might come across as somebody who's very confident and secure and quote unquote masculine, but internally they don't have self-awareness. They have not dealt with their emotions. They have not been able to articulate even their emotions and deal with them in healthy ways. So actually internally they are insecure. And so what happens is that when a man and a woman get into a relationship and the man is externally secure and masculine, but internally insecure, then according to this definition of masculine and feminine, he actually becomes in the position of feminine because he actually needs encouragement and support and validation and protection because he didn't get that either from his parents or from the world or whatever else, because he's built his self-worth on external things. And then when you come into a relationship, you can see that there are so many men who are actually insecure. And then the woman gets to be in the masculine position of taking care and protecting. And I can tell you from experience that it doesn't feel natural. Of course, as women, we want to take care of our partners. Of course, there will be times often when we're giving advice or protecting and serving our boyfriends or our husbands, and that's natural. But to consistently be in the position of needing to provide shelter and support, for most women, including myself, and again, I'm just going to speak for myself, it doesn't necessarily always feel natural. So again, we emphasize the wrong masculine and feminine qualities. So, sorry, I'm just going to take a quick peek at my notes. Okay, here we go. So, pardon me.
Right, Bhakti, I'll just chime in with a point just to support what you were saying was that, and Bhakti Tirtha Swami makes this wonderful point that stayed with me ever since I read it, but that most people have heard that we come into relationships looking to, two halves looking to complete each other. But in fact, what we should be striving to do is to become whole ourselves. So you have two wholes coming together rather than when you have two halves, one is looking to take, you're always in the position where you're taking from the other to, complete yourself. But that a relationship will always be more successful when we're trying to be as whole as possible. And it just speaks to Radha Bhakti's point about, when we're pushed into certain corners, then it actually prevents us from becoming that whole.
Thanks, Raseshwar. Okay, so the last point I'll make on this is that the game is kind of rigged for men. If they are spiritually evolved and they kind of demonstrate their feminine characteristics like vulnerability and sensitivity, then often the world sees them as weak. But then if they try to exhibit those qualities that the world perceives as masculine, then internally he can become insecure. So it's not easy to be in a man's body. It's very difficult, actually. So what can happen, as Raseshwar mentioned, that Purusha has this control. He has this desire to protect and to serve. And Malvika, I loved your point as when you were thinking that the mother is the Prakriti, but you were actually describing Purusha. You were talking about the desire to serve, the desire to provide, the desire to be of service. And that's exactly what Purusha is. It's not position from up here where I want to be condescending and control. It's a place of genuine love and service where I want to provide. And as Raseshwar mentioned, so the man has that aspect of like control, and the women has some power, or the person in the feminine aspect of the relationship has some power, because you'll see it with children and their parents everywhere, that people will laugh and joke and say that their kid controls them because they're controlled by by love. Excuse me. So you're controlled by that love, and you can see, and I can say as somebody in a female body, that we all know that we can make a guy jump through hoops for us. We have power. We definitely have power in our relationships, and that is a reality. And so we can actually exploit each other. If a man uses his control to exploit a woman, then that is a form of abuse. But the girls don't get off easy as well, because if we exploit our position of power, then we can become extremely emasculating as well. And that is a recipe for disaster, whether you're looking at Shastra or secular books. So one of the things that Raseshwar mentioned earlier as well is that, so women want this kind of emotional support, and also women need or tend to need variety in relationships. And this is something that also originates in the spiritual world, but I'll give you an example. Let's say a husband brings his wife flowers for a birthday, and she says, "Thank you so much. I really love these flowers. You're amazing." Then the next birthday, he brings her flowers, and she says, "Thank you. I love these so much. Thank you again for the flowers." The next birthday, he brings her flowers, and she's like, "Dude, can I, seriously, what else you got? Give me something different. I need a little change. I need some." It's a very simple example, but it is representative of something a little deeper, that we do value variety. So because women like variety, especially in rasa, sometimes a woman might exhibit some anger, and it's playful. And again, this has its origins in the spiritual world. So there's one beautiful pastime that I love so much of Radhesham, where Shri Krishna tells Radharani that her face is as beautiful as the moon. And she gets angry because she's like, "Are you saying that my face has pot marks and craters on it?" And she gets angry at him. And he has to grovel. And this is rasa. Now, of course, the difference is that she's doing this for his satisfaction. Whereas in the material world, I for sure have done things like that for my own satisfaction. Because according to John Gray, women love and need to feel cherished. And sometimes I myself will create a situation where I'll make my husband feel like maybe I'm upset with him so that I can get some of that cherishedness, or whatever the word is, that love from him. So again, of course, this originates in the spiritual world, but it becomes perverted in the material world. So we as women, we can take that power and abuse it. And again, we can become emasculating. So a little rasa is okay, as long as we're not being mean, because we can be mean. So while the Shastra, tends to, we're thinking about how it's hard on women, but it's also hard on men, and the world is hard on men in terms of looking at some of the ways that they can be exploitative, but women can be exploitative as well. So again, because a woman wants to be taken care of, and he wants to take care, we have that power. And we can make guys jump through hoops for us. So if a man exerts his control in a way that's not in the woman's service, and if a woman exerts her power in a way that's not in the man's service, we can be prone to exploit one another. And therefore, the key point and the key takeaway here is around being servants of each other, regardless of if you are Purusha or Prakriti, if you are male or female, if you have the masculine role or the feminine role. Our job, especially as devotees, but even just as human beings, is to be of service to one another. And when there is a service competition between two partners, then a real beautiful and healthy relationship ensues where there is no abuse of power or control. So we're going to get a little more into the meat of some of these controversial statements, and I'll throw it to you, Raseshwar.
Yeah, sure.
All right, before, I know Anshu had her hand up for a while, so I just wanted to take a moment to address that if she wanted to share something or ask something.
Oh,
yeah, please go ahead.
I just had a question with respect to the mother-son. When we were talking about that mother is the Purusha and the sun is the Prakriti. But when the same woman who is a mother is also a wife, then she is the Prakriti in the husband-wife relationship, right? So the same person can be Purusha and the same person can be Prakriti. So is it just like the percentages or some constitution that everyone has this little bit of Prakriti and little bit of Purusha in them, and not dependent on whether they are in the male body or female body? I mean, I'm just a little confused about this. If you
Yeah,
could
so in every kind of the principle will differ based on, maybe you've heard this principle of Kala, Desha, or Patra, so time, place, and circumstance. So based on the specific context, that one person can have, wear in one sense both hats, right? So again, we have to look at the specific context. So you just explained it perfectly yourself, where you said in the mother-son, it's this way. But then as soon as the mother steps into the role of the wife, then the dynamic also changes and that energy changes. And again, it's specific to the context of who we're in relationship with always.
so
Right?
the Purusha Prakriti is based on the relationship, the context we are talking about, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Always. Yeah. Right. Like even as a man, I'm, if I may be Purusha with respect to a partner, but immediately as soon as I look at my relationship with Krishna, I'm automatically Prakriti, right? So again, it's always who in relationship to.
Okay, thank you so much.
I can also say that in relationships, we can alternate, tend to have one dominating role. So for example, like I said in the beginning, I'm often giving my husband protection or advice. But generally speaking, I tend to be in a feminine position in that relationship. But there are times when I'm put in the masculine position where he needs some support and guidance and protection. So you can alternate in a relationship, but again, you tend to have one primary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
And as Risteshwar Madhava said as well, in relation to Krishna, all of us are Prakriti. All of us are female.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Welcome. So just moving on to the next point, we wanted to specifically talk about, all the points that we mentioned before. How do these lead to, for example, women needing protection? Now, Bhakti Swami, he makes this point that Radha Bhakti mentioned before, that women have better use of both hemispheres of the brain, and the men tend to lean more towards the right side of the brain, which centers more around logic. Now, we know that I think it's easily understood both from a Western science point of view, that women in general have a higher level of emotional intelligence, which means that they're going to be more expressive. They tend to value relationships more, not always, but they're able to see finer details in situations, and they see life as more nuanced because they are they have a better attunement to emotions, right? And how people are feeling. Now, again, as we mentioned before, this is in greater ratio for this emotional intelligence is a greater ratio for women than men. Now, men, on the other hand, they're going to take shelter, and they're going to tend to look at their lens by which the world is from a position of ratio of logic. And again, we mentioned that through what predominates, this spheres of the brain. But this logic, what it tends to do is that it can tend to be much more decisive and sharp. But again, what logic sometimes can miss is the context of a situation, maybe perhaps the emotions. So for example, even when you see a lot of, I know this from just practical experience of working in the hospital, I've had bosses, chiefs, we have chiefs, like our boss is called the chief who is a female versus a male. Now, sometimes there be situations where people have to be spoken to, or people have to be, in fact, let go from their position. So like, for example, when we hire and fire, firing is not, I can say, sometimes as easy for women because they're looking at the situation that the person they're in, they're looking at their feelings, they're looking at perhaps the context that they're in their home situation. And again, so many variety of situations. Whereas a man because of their logic-based decision. They're like, this person is not good at their job, cut, axe. And they may just make it, it's more of a, you know, a unilateral decision that is, again, based on logic, right? And that's what tends to govern their life. So, but the point here to remember is that when we go too much on the emotional side, we have when that's overplayed, we can become sentimental. And that when the logic is pushed over to too much, we can become impersonal, very dispassionate, and tends to be quite dry, right? So these are, again, and this is, we're going to constantly come back to this point about balance, right? And that both of these are required for both individuals. The logic is required, and the emotion is required. And it's always these competing things that we have to take into consideration, both if we're male or female, but that there is a predominance and a natural tendency of one compared to the other. And then just finally going on from there, how does this, how may this look? We can take just a simple example of, for example, just in the, in just a relationship context. We mentioned this example last time, but that we have a couple who they're considering going to a birthday party for their friends, right? It says, we really don't want to go because we don't like them, or they're not our favorite people to hang out with. And so the guy will be like, okay, that makes very good sense. Let's not go. And then the woman will come back, but how is it going to look to other people? How is it going to fare for the longevity of our relationship? Are we going to leave a bad taste in their mouth? Is this, maybe we won't get invited to something later because of this? So they're going to take into consideration so many other things. And what's going to happen in the end? They may end up, they'll go to the birthday party because, again, there were so many other factors that were taken into consideration. Whereas the guy was like, you don't like this person, we won't go. So again, that's something very simple. Now, I thought a very good example of how, this kind of plays out also from a Shastric example is maybe people have read Srimad Bhagavatam, they've specifically read the first canto where they see that in this, after the war is over, Ashwatthama, he kills all 5 sons of the Pandavas, and at night. So in a very dishonorable way. And when they finally, Arjuna captures Ashwatthama and brings him to Draupadi, looks at so many different, situations here. And she ultimately looks at Ashwatthama and says, I do not want someone else to feel how I felt because she lost a son. So Prabhupada specifically comments here that here, while she's being very compassionate, because of her feminine nature, sentiment, and her emotions also contributed to her decision. So I think it's a very real example for us to see here that also plays out in the Shastra. But what happens here is that it can also, when we were referring to protection, it also is very important to hear now that the feminine is protected, because they can also put themselves in situations that may not always be in their best interest because they may be driven by their emotions. And sometimes we see this happening where females may be in relationships that may not be conducive to them because the partner is not treating them properly. That happens a lot. And so again, protection just doesn't mean physical protection. It may just mean someone who can give more clarity into and see a situation clearly. And so because sometimes women focus on the nuances, their judgment may not always be as clear, right? So then how that brings us back to the point, what is the Vedic way, the Vedic kind of conception talks about what are the responsibilities of the man and the woman to each other, right? Now there's 2 essential qualities from both, the male and the female perspective that we can
Sorry, Rashishwar.
Go ahead.
Is it okay if I chime in for a moment?
Please, go ahead.
So again, I think some of what was just said can be confronting for us in female bodies. But when I think about that and when I reflect on that, we can talk about, if all of that theory is correct, then if a man is in an abusive situation, then theoretically he can use his right brain leaning tendency to recognize it and walk away. Whereas when a woman, because we talked about women wanting to and needing to feel cherished and loved, when a woman is feeling cherished and loved, she can easily be exploited by people who have the wrong intentions. So while she is also perfectly capable of using her right brain, the left brain allows her to see the nuances in the situation, like the example of Draupadi. And sometimes, that's great. And other times we might need some support from someone else, and it could be another woman as well. It doesn't have to be a man. Another woman or another person to say to us, hey, this is a bad situation for you. It's time for you to get out. And I can tell you from experience, having had one really terrible relationship prior to getting married, where it was an emotionally abusive relationship, and I stayed with that person for many years. And I consider myself to be not an unintelligent person, but I could see in retrospect, looking back, that this was true for me. I was seeing the good in the person. I was seeing that, like, I've seen the good in this person. I know what he's capable of. And this stuff isn't really him. It's just because of this, it's because of that. And in retrospect, I mean, we could talk, this is a whole other talk about like the dynamics of abuse and like the psychology. But in retrospect, I can see that I needed some protection. And that if I allowed myself to be protected by my parents or by some of my girlfriends who were trying to help me, then I could have avoided being in that situation. Now, that's for me personally. But even if we look at the statistics of the Me Too movement, we can see that most of the victims are women. And so why? Is it because they're less intelligent? No. But it makes sense to me personally as I grapple with these statements and try to make sense of them. This does make sense. And the fact that I was, and probably every woman on this call has been able to say Me Too at some point, sadly. But the fact that we are able to say that, again, it doesn't mean that we're unintelligent in the way that we're perceiving that sentence to be. It means that we're easily exploited. We are targets. We're easy targets for people. So we don't, like I said, it can be confronting for me, but in my own life, this makes sense. And when I think about my relationship with some of my mentees, young women who are very intelligent, some of them are also active feminists, all of them are extremely intelligent and making strides in their material and spiritual lives. I often hear them say, and I used to say as well, that in a partner, I'm looking for somebody who's smarter than me, somebody who knows more than I do. I want to feel taken care of. I want to feel like I can just be myself and feel taken care of. And I felt the same way as well. And that doesn't discount our own intelligence. It's very natural. And actually, when I met my husband, who I think is so learned in Shastra and who I really go to for advice often, I changed something about my nature. I suddenly did feel more feminine, and it did feel so natural to be in that position. And then the last thing that I'll say quickly is that when I think about Krishna's pastimes, when I think about Shastric references, and when I think about Janava Mata and Yashoda Mai and Srimati Radharani and other women in Shastra, they have always been completely cherished. And when I think about the category of living beings who require protection according to Shastra, you think about Brahmins, you think about cows, you think about children, and you think about women. So if you look at Brahmins and cows and children, these are all objects of our worship, and women are placed in the same category. Why? Because all four of these categories of living entities are sacred. And when something is sacred, it should be cherished. And that really helped me put this together. And then the last thing I'll say really quickly, sorry, Rasishwar, is Srila Prabhupada, the author of some of these statements, when we look at the way he treated women and how he gave all of the women in ISKCON equal opportunities to give class, to go out to different countries and build temples, and the way he treated women. There's a new book that's been released called Bonds of Love, where it's described all these beautiful interactions Prabhupada had with the women of his movement. So the author of those statements, and then you look at his behavior, you'll see that he doesn't mean it the way that I was taking it and when I was feeling hurt or offended. He meant that women are sacred and therefore need some protection. And it's not that women are less intelligent the way that we understand and take that statement. But again, I think that it's about the use of the right versus the left brain. There's so many advantages, like Draupadi was able to forgive, whereas maybe the Pandavas weren't able to. But the left brain, the holistic viewpoint, saved so many people in situations. And similarly, sometimes we need that balance of just the right brain to say, hey, Radha Bhakti, get out of that relationship because this person is abusive. Sorry, Raseshwar, please. You were going to say about duties to each other.
Okay. So I think that just flows well into the where I was going anyways. So the Radha Bhakti was speaking about specifically the role of the woman, and we talked about if the woman needs to feel loved and cherished, the man, he also, his inherent identity, because of that ego, also wants to feel useful, wants to feel productive, wants to feel like they can provide some type of, I guess, shelter or protection in some type of way. But how is this done, right? So there's two really essential qualities that the masculine energy can provide that love and that woman feeling cherished. And it's through being in control of their senses, so sense control, right? And what that means, sense control, is that to eliminate that desire to exploit. That's what I mean by sense control, being in control of senses. And one of the ways just we can do this is that, I mean, just from a very practical level, I was just reflecting on this, but the Shastra, they refer to that, females, we have 7 mothers, right? And I thought this was just even keeping this within our mind, right? The 7 mothers, if you don't know, it's our real mother. It's the wife of our teacher. It's the wife of a friend or a brahmana. It's the wife of a king. It's the cow, the nurse, and the earth, right? So these are all the 7 mothers. And I read such a fantastic quote that I really want to share on Mother's Day. But it says, that we can never repay the debt of a mother because one's mother is worth 1,000 fathers. This is from the Manu Samhita. And I thought that was such a powerful point, because if we just try to, as best possible, imbibe that mindset where there is that love and respect for all females, then again, it will help us as men to remove that mindset to exploit, and which will then also help us be in control of our senses. And then the second quality that's just very critical to be able to express that love to woman is being sensitive. Now, sensitivity comes in a different, can be seen in a variety of ways, but specifically sensitive to the needs of a female. Now, that can show up in a lot of different ways. In a lot of ways, it could be, turning off that solution logical brain and just listening. Sometimes it can be, being acknowledging, being supportive, right? These are all ways that we can be sensitive. And sometimes this doesn't naturally, as we mentioned before, it doesn't always come naturally to the masculine side. But again, these two qualities, if we can really try to imbibe these two qualities, guaranteed the feminine will feel that love and that support and that cherish that they're looking for. And then the guy also, what that does is that also inspires two qualities that are essential, that is important for the female to also imbibe. And that is, the first is to be satisfied. So we talked about earlier that women really appreciate variety, but that it's really important in that need for variety is that if we're seeing that the other side, the male, is giving their best effort, to be satisfied with their best effort. Why? Because the male ego, I can definitely tell you from my experience, is very delicate, right? And it wants to feel inspired, and it wants to feel that it is being useful. And so the the quickest way to to make the man feel weak is to always tell them they're not enough, or to always tell them what they're doing is not enough, or that they need more. But that concept of being satisfied is tremendously an empowering feeling for the male. And it also, again, but it's not always, it's takes work on the female side. And this is their, area to work on. And then the second thing is to be chaste, to be dedicated and loyal. And so that chastity refers to the fact that we are committed, right? We are committed and we're focused on the partner that we're with, because again, it can be a demoralizing thing when the man doesn't see that he is enough for that female. And the way that a female can express that is by giving them that commitment and dedication. So those are two things. Again, the man needs to be validated as a protector, and the woman needs to feel understood. So again, how does this even show up in, for example, when we talk about Western science? The woman wants empathy, the man wants to problem solve. The man wants to feel useful, the woman wants to feel loved, right? So again, we see these things even very prominently found in any time we're looking to, we're looking at the Western depiction of successful male-female roles. And again, we see these in movies all the time. Now, unfortunately, what the movies forget is that all four of these qualities that I spoke about, they require training and they require practice, right? And so it's not just something we can snap our fingers and do. So for, at least speaking from the male perspective, in terms of this sensitivity and sense control, for that sensitivity, the Shastra will say this, but also my experience is that if we can develop regulation in our life, so specifically sadhana, where we are reading and chanting, these two things really, really help our sensitivity. It really helps us develop some control over our emotions, and it gives us that patience and tolerance that completely will inspire any individual, let alone our partner, to also then want to do the same themselves. Again, so in the position where we're like leading, but then in that leading, we also empower others to do the same for other individuals themselves. So those are the two, the two qualities for each side that I wanted to kind of have as our take home. That can be seen as our duty to each other, and what we can both respectively, both the male and the female sides, can work on, that are very much at the heart of Vedic psychology for males and females. Radha Bhakti?
Yeah, so we're almost at the end. We just want to do one little last section, then we'll go over some key takeaways. So what do we do about all of the stuff that we've heard about today? So first and foremost, let's remember that actually we're not our bodies. We've been talking about being in male bodies and female bodies, but let's just remember, let's have that perspective that actually we're not our bodies. But being in a particular body comes with its own set of conditions and facilities, and we can try to use them in Krishna's service. So for example, it's actually said in Shastra that it's easier for a woman to become more Krishna conscious because of her natural desire to serve, her natural desire to seek some protection and some guidance. And we can also use, in those of us who are in female bodies, we can also use our desire for variety and also dovetail that to our bhakti by having various ways of practicing and also sharing bhakti with others.
Yeah, and then the second takeaway that we had was, again, when we talk about this need to be useful, this usefulness very much should be taken in the context of useful in Krishna's service, right? So again, we should just always step back and always say, why are we wanting to develop these qualities? But the bigger picture is devotional service. The bigger picture is bhakti. And that we this really, I mean, today we talked about very practical things, viewpoints of the general male and female logic or tendencies and mindsets, but that the bigger picture is that, as Radha Bhakti mentioned, we're not this body, we are the spirit soul, the Atma, that's looking to connect and serve Krishna, right? So everything we talked about is in that context of trying to develop that relationship of devotional service to Krishna, right? And then the last point is just that to always treat each other with love and respect, right? And as Prabhupada did, he was such a shining example of always balancing the way he treated both his male and his female disciples, right? And when this love and respect is there, this tendency to exploit, which is both can be, the male can exploit, but also the female can take advantage of their power too and also exploit. And Krishna doesn't appreciate that from either side, right? So again, just going back to the point to advance spiritually, which is our goal, to advance spiritually, to serve our teachers, which is our conduit for serving Krishna, we do this with this genuine mood of love and respect that Prabhupada really exemplified, right? And I think one of the relationships that we see in as our example is the relationship of Sita Ram, right? They were the perfect examples of the male-female relationship in the Grahastha ashram, but also just the perfect examples of Purusha and Prakriti. Sita, she had that courage and that strength and that fearlessness, right? She spoke the truth and she had power that, to withstand Ravana, right? Those are the female qualities we talked about, that the Bhagavad Gita sources. But then we see, Ram, not only did he have that chivalrous nature to fight and protect, but also we saw that when he dealt with Sita, there was that very soft side, as we saw when they were in the forest together, when they were there together intimately, right? There was always that softness there that always inspired Sita then to serve, and they both protected each other, right? He's forgiving, always forgiving, right? And so again, just going back to that point, that as we advance spiritually, we really want to try to balance. And one of as just to kind of end, we'll take questions, but as I just wanted to leave this exercise with everyone as in the spirit of trying to achieve that balance. And for those of you that may or may not be in a relationship, I think this is still a good exercise that I did either way, that I was told by my seniors, is that if we're at a stage in life where we're looking for a partner, to list down 10 qualities we would like to see in that partner, right? And that should give us a time to reflect, because I think a lot of people, we have this concept of what we're looking for, and it's this, it's this Ram or Sita, and that's fine, but are we also Ram or Sita, right? So I think that's the first thing. But the whole point of having these 10 qualities is that we can meditate on these. Now, what I want you to do with these 10 qualities, both boys and girls watching this, is to go through those 10 and say, hey, of these 10, I genuinely feel like I imbibe these. And that in addition, when we look at these qualities, what are the qualities that I'm not imbibing so well? Or what are the qualities that I can work on, right? And again, this is really there to push us to become that whole and become that balance before we're, going into that relationship, because it will be all that better. It will be all that more satisfying, and we'll be able to serve from such a greater capacity when we're coming in. So again, this is just a simple exercise before we go to question and answer.
So we also just, thanks Raseshwar, that was really helpful. Just our main takeaways, if you want to go over the first couple, Raseshwar.
Right. So again, the as we were mentioning, the Vedic civilization, the basis of the culture is that it's deeply founded on the culture of respect for women. I think this is paramount for us to remember. And there's really, in fact, no other culture that treats women and exalts women as as we say, Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, right? That is how the women should always at all times be respected, regardless of what stage in life they are or what position they're in. And that, there's not a higher or lesser position where we, that higher or lesser position that we have, that's our material vision, right? But again, when that protection is there, society flourishes. The whole reason why the Mahabharata ends up in that war is when we go to that game of dice, the whole premise for that war was disrespect and dishonoring of the women. So again, when that principle of protection is there, which I want to emphasize as the real take-home point, that the whole society flourishes based on this one principle. Right, Bhakti?
Yeah, I wish we ended on that because that was really powerful. But just a couple more takeaways, just as a recap. Raseshwar mentioned that for men, the two most important characteristics to try to imbibe and don't necessarily come naturally, again, because of what society tells us to do, is to be sensitive and to have sense control. So in Raseshwar, your notes, you talked about for sensitivity, we can look at acharyas as examples and for inspiration. And as it relates to sense control, as people in male bodies, you can chant, you can read, and you might know from the first verse of the Nectar of Instruction, controlling the tongue by refraining from idle, talks, and also from refraining from eating stuff that is not first offered to the Lord. That actually, if we can just control the tongue, it actually automatically controls the other senses. Go ahead, Raseshwar.
No, such a good point that Nectar of Instruction is very clear that all our senses, they're aligned, right? The tongue, the belly, the genitals, they're all in a line. So if we start with the tongue, everything downstream is also controlled, right? So what we speak, what we put in our mouth, these are such practical things to take away as a starting point.
And men should also, and all of us actually, men and women, we should try to think of women as our mother, as the Shastra says, which I know seems a little bit foreign and strange. You're not going to think of your friend at work as your mom. But if you think about the level of respect that you give your mother and try to think of all women in that way, then it does change the way the whole world shows up. And for men as well, and also for women. But if you see that a woman is wanting to take the lead, then it's the responsibility of you as somebody in a man's body to be exemplary. And for women, we talked about how we have power in a relationship as well. It is extremely important that we don't abuse that power, and we use that power in service, and that we are not emasculating. So again, we are satisfied. And that also doesn't come naturally because of this desire for variety. It's like, I'll tell my husband often, I also want this, or I also want that. And it is a practice to just also, be satisfied and encouraging and validating, because that builds him up. And there's no reason why I should have too much of an ego to build up my husband. Also, just always remember the way that Srila Prabhupada treated women and how much he loved us all and gave us equal opportunities and continues to give us equal opportunities. And also for all of us, let's accept our differences. We are in different kinds of bodies, and that comes with different conditionings. Let's accept those differences and celebrate them. We're not weak for having these feminine characteristics, men included. Being vulnerable, being sensitive, being emotional are not weaknesses if they're used properly, and especially if they're used in Krishna's service. And then for everyone, once again, if we just bubble it up, for one is, our main duty is to chant 16 rounds, follow the 4 regulative principles, and associate with devotees. That's it. And we highly, highly, highly recommend that everybody on this call finds a mentor as well, because there will be statements in the Shastra that are difficult to understand. And we are not able to understand these statements without the support of seniors, and hopefully a mentor who, if they don't understand, then they can go to seniors. It's a question of learning. It's a process of learning. And also, we should always be reading in a mood of submission. So I know I made a statement earlier where I was talking about, I don't think I'm unintelligent. Why would Prabhupada say that? And that's okay to feel, not the most humble statement in the world. But if we feel that way, it's important to be honest and be able to talk about the things. Prabhupada said something that I don't understand, and can you help me? And again, in a submissive mood, because we know Prabhupada loves us and cares for us deeply. And finally, the way we treat each other, whether it's our mothers or our fathers or our partners or our siblings, is actually the way that Krishna receives our devotional service. Please try to remember that. Somebody said that to us. Mother Rukmini said that to us at our engagement ceremony. She said, the way you treat each other is the way that Krishna receives your service. So think about that. Think about that. Try to imbibe that. The way you treat the person on the street, the way you treat your partner, the way you treat your siblings, the way you treat everybody on this call is the way Krishna receives us. So please reflect on that as well. And we are 2 minutes over time, and so it's okay if you need to go, but otherwise, if you would like to stay, we'd love to hear your questions. Raseshwar, any closing words before we do the Q&A?
No, we'll just go with Q&A, and then I'll just list off some of the other resources that people could turn to.
Okay. So Shruti, I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi, world, first of all, to everyone. I had like two, I don't know, questions or comments, but it's like just to discuss on. I wanted to first talk about the part where Rasheshwara Mother Das was saying about how in the hospital when you were working there, you were talking about how you tend to look for men who are, because they're more like, they think more logically when they have to fire somebody or something like that. But also I've experienced in the workplace, and even I've heard stories from other people as well, where they've said that when the women tend to think logically like that, they are seen in a very negative light. They're like, oh, she's so cold-hearted and she doesn't care, and she thinks that just because she's in a higher position than us, she can do whatever she wants. So I think it's like equally as difficult for the women as well who have like masculine qualities. And it's like it goes both ways. Like it's difficult for the men when they show their feminine qualities, and it's difficult for the women when they show their masculine qualities. So I think it's like a problem that goes both ways. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, and just speaking to that point, something that's happening in the field of healthcare is that there's a growing number of females in the field than there was before. And so what that's leading to is most the leadership positions are now occupied by females, right? And so we know that the females are definitely kicking butt for sure, right? But this definitely, what happens is that sometimes they're, because there's certain conceptions that society has, they're pigeonholed into being a certain way. And to lead, you have to have certain qualities to do it, either male or female. So I agree with you.
And
what was the second one?
Oh yeah, and the second one that was more for what Radha Bhakti was saying. It was about in the relationship where being protected doesn't always come naturally to us. But then again, don't you think that also goes both ways? Because I think it's like in any kind of relationship, not just like I don't know, like a loving relationship or like a friendship or any kind of relationship, isn't it that both the people need to feel protected? Both the people have times where they need that sort of protection. Like and like I think. I don't remember who was saying that, but it was like, you can't be in a relationship where it's just one person who's always giving their all to it and then the other person doing nothing. Because I've had relationships and friendships where it was like, I was giving my 100% but then I was always a protector, and the other person never protected me or like was never sort of there for me or supported me when I needed that sort of thing. So again, it was like that sort of balance.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you're right. It's not that, the masculine person doesn't also need protection. And I think it just takes different forms. So again, we have to be protective and in service to each other. Because again, women also have the power to make men feel horrible. And primarily it comes in the form of emasculation, but it can come in lots of ways. So you're absolutely right. Both parties, whatever the kind of relationship it is, the underlying principle is always service. If there's any kind of control or power that's not in service, then it's a recipe for failure. Thank you so much for sharing that, Shruti.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm snapping for you under my desk.
Anyone else?
I have a question / comment, and like both of you, like some of the principles you have mentioned, like I run into them all the time, so it's really helpful when someone explains those to me. But like sometimes I run into issues where I agree with what you're saying, the principles, but then I am afraid that if I tell it to, say, maybe a friend or a colleague or me or a a girl that I went on a date with, that person may think that this caveman with very who's very controlling, and I don't want to perpetuate the stereotype of the man being controlling. So, but at the same time, it makes sense. So, how do we incorporate those principles and tell it to people we care about without sounding like a caveman?
Do you mind if I take a shot?
Right.
So thanks for the question. I mean, it's such a good point. I thought about this so many times that when we talk about, when we read some things in the book, like how does this going to translate into real life, right? And I have found that best, the best way to speak a message sometimes is just to live it, right? And that in fact says everything that we would like to say. Now, obviously there are times where we're going to have to be perhaps potentially be direct, but I really do find that if you take on these principles and imbibe them, what you are looking for will naturally come back. Because one thing that people have to understand is that these principles, this Vedic principles in psychology we're talking about, these are Krishna's laws, right? And what I mean by when I say Krishna's laws, these are not just something that's nice to have. Oh, it would be nice to be sensitive. It would be nice to be sense controlled. These are in fact the only principles that work, right? So where I'm going with that is that if you, as best possible, take these up, I think that's the most powerful message. Sometimes we don't always have to necessarily speak it directly, but if we can live it, I think that's our greatest message. But like if you wanted to be more specific, like I think if you wanted to be more specific in terms of, I guess, the context of the relationship matters when you want to speak about it more directly. I think what is important to do is to always look at the level of the relationship you have with this person. I think it's always important to see what their receptivity may be, because I think when there is love and trust, when there's trust in any relationship, I think speaking more directly, the message will always be more palatable and well received, right? So I think thinking about a couple of those factors beforehand, if you wanted to speak about it more directly, but just the overlying principle is that if you can take these up, I think that's the best way of sharing the message. Radha Bhakti?
Yeah, that was a nice answer, Visishwar. I'm going to say one thing that's almost the same. Amit, if you speak about and imbibe the principle of service, then you'll naturally fall into those roles, like Visishwar was saying. And the other thing I would say is that was exactly our challenge to ourselves in putting this talk together. And that's why we did it, because we were like, we're going to learn about what this means and how to articulate it to others. And that's why we're doing the first talk a second time, because we wanted to refine it, and we're also learning. And so I would encourage you also in a safe space to start talking this out with people, seeing what makes sense according to Shastra, seeing what makes sense according to Shastra that is applicable to you and that you can relate to, and work on refining it. And if this is a message that you want to help people with, then yeah, just practice. And we're both here for you, for sure. If you want to bounce ideas, I'm sure we can learn so much from you with your experience in family law and just in general in life. So yeah, just practice and refine. And I think for everything we have to do that as people who want to share Krishna consciousness, whether it's directly like in a talk or whether it's just through our behavior. It's about practice.
I think Amit, just speaking, I don't know if you've ever wanted to use these principles specifically in the work setting. I think what would be, if you wanted to present this in a way to people that may not be in contact with this at all, I think it's always really powerful to say, hey, in the Eastern tradition, we have these case examples of, whether it be a story or a context, but I think it's very much understood, like everyone's learning from different types of societies, different cultures, different theological stories from the past of how we can draw. And again, this whole talk, it centers around how we can make ancient wisdom relevant for modern times, right? And so we're happy to, you know, if you wanted to be more specific in terms of the situation, I'm happy to have a discussion on how we could do that better.
Yeah, both of your answers help, and I will reach out to you at some point.
Please do.
Anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
I think we had some online submissions, some anonymous. Malvika, do you just want to read those?
Yeah. So the first question says, when you talked about how Prabhupada said that women are less intelligent or less of who we actually are as individuals, do you think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that women were oppressed at that time? Also, did Krishna not say that we all as human beings are equal in all aspects? And it's just that those who focus on certain aspects are strong in that way. So an example they gave was Kshatriya men and women focused on their physical strength.
Right. Let's do the first part of the question first. Can you just repeat the first part?
Yeah, so it says, when you talked about how Prabhupada said that women are less intelligent or less of who we actually are as individuals, do you think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that women were oppressed at that time?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, it's, did Prabhupada say these statements about women because they were oppressed at that time? I'm gonna say, again, if I understand your question, that the answer is no. In the days of Krishna's time here with us, Krishna's pastimes on earth, the women were not oppressed. As we mentioned before, they were cherished and worshipped in many ways. During the time of his writing, that women were probably oppressed in terms of, like, I don't know, the right to vote, all these different things. I also don't think he had that in his mind. And I can't, obviously, I can't say what I think Prabhupada meant, but my understanding is that I think these are Shastric principles. And the way we tried to explain them today was to contextualize them and bring more color and context, given Prabhupada the personality, given us and our mentalities today and how we can understand them, and also the essence of what Prabhupada was trying to say. So while those statements could be confronting, the essence is actually quite beautiful if we just take the time to work it out. So I don't think that he said those things as a result of women being oppressed at the time. Rasishwar, would you add to that? And again, I hope I'm understanding your question. Rasishwar, what would you add?
Yeah, the only thing to add is, you know, the term oppression, well, there, you may see it kind of playing out in this world, like in the world we're in, but it's not a spiritual tenet or principle. And I think one of the ways that I have resolved a lot of conflicting things that I've seen visually with my own eyes and what I've read in the books of in our Shastra is that there's a teaching, the pure teaching, and how it's applied, right? So one thing we have to understand is because we are all material beings who are conditioned, that when we apply the spiritual teaching, because of that material condition, we can often represent the pure teaching, right? So Prabhupada, what he gave us was the highest standard, and he gave us the pure teachings. Now, sometimes when we see that play out in real life, we'll be like, well, this person is not behaving, whether it leads to oppression or not, that, you know, is another discussion. But if we see that and we see the gap, that gap is usually in our own deficiency in applying the teaching, right? So I think it's always really important to differentiate in our lives what the principle and the teaching is versus the application of the teaching.
Nice.
That's all I wanted to say.
Awesome. The second part of that question is, did Krishna not say that we all as human beings are equal in all aspects? And it's just that those who focus on certain aspects are strong in that way. Example, Kshatriya men and women focused on their physical strength.
I think this was in part to that question and to that comment, Radha Bhakti, that you made, that men are generally have much more upper body strength. And so this, I think, is focused on that point.
Mm-hmm.
So we are all equal in terms of being spirit souls, part and parcel of Krishna. Krishna is impartial to all, but partial to those who love and worship him with devotion and who also share this philosophy with others. Yes, part of our bodily conditioning is that we do kind of gravitate towards different varnas, whether that's Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, or Shudras. My understanding is that that's a designation that belongs to the body and that can change in the next life as well. So yes, they're all equal, but we still come into this world in this particular life with a particular physical and metaphysical composition, and therefore, and facilities that therefore frame the way we perceive the world, the way we behave in the world, the way we react to situations, even the way we try to imbibe and act upon scriptures, what to speak of the material conditioning that we've all been exposed to since time immemorial. So while we are equal, we all have different experiences and different levels of relationship with Krishna, and therefore can be reciprocated with differently. And therefore we have different experiences, and again, physical, psychophysical, or psychological differences. So yes, people in male bodies tend to have more upper body strength, as an example. Kshatriyas tend to feel more gravitation towards justice and truth. Shudras have more gravitation towards the arts. So yes, we can exhibit different qualities, but in Krishna's eyes, again, we are equal, but he is partial to the devotees. Again, I don't know if that answers your question, but Vasishvar, what would you add to that?
No, that Varna is our psychophysical nature. It is a material designation. But, the analogy from Bhagavatam is that Varnas are seen as compared to like Vishnu's body, right? So they all represent different parts of the body, and none of those parts of the body can function independent of each other, right? So in Krishna's eyes, although people are of different psychophysical nature or Varna, they all function together to make a whole and society, function in a healthy way. So everyone is seen in that regard as equal, although everyone's position and service might be different.
And we're all dependent on each other.
Right.
Awesome. And then our last question is, in a scenario wherein a husband and wife are working and the wife is earning more and paying more of the bills, could it mean it won't work? I think it meaning the relationship.
Good question. Go ahead, Vasishvar.
No, I was just going to say that it depends on a variety of factors, because I do know of multiple relationships that are succeeding in this specific situation that you've created. I will say, just from a male point of view, it requires the male to adopt a different mindset than maybe what would be traditional, or what maybe he would even expect to do. But that if there is, a spiritual training and a spiritual maturity, that the relationship like that can still succeed, because the man, even though, let's say materially, which is, let's say money, may not be providing, they will be providing in ways that, they may be directing the family spiritually and guiding in that way. There may be so many other things that, again, the male may be serving and contributing more to balance that, right? So that's just my initial kind of answer, but the context, very much the details of this question that you've posed, there are a lot of factors there.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add is that, so I'm married to an entrepreneur, and when we first got married, he wasn't bringing in an income, and I was. And the level, and I remember thinking about this, the level to which I still felt like I was feminine and he was masculine was shocking even to me, again, because of previous relationship where that would have been a problem. And so it's a testament to his maturity and his understanding that again, masculinity is not defined by these externals. And again, you know, it's because again, that desire to provide, that desire to be of support and assistance, that some men might feel like, I can't be with a woman who's more successful, quote unquote, successful because she makes more money. And again, I had that with that one guy. Then it won't work if he doesn't have that maturity to understand that providing for a woman doesn't only mean financially, but sometimes it doesn't mean financially at all. It actually means what Rasishra was speaking about during the talk about being able to provide support and emotional protection and variety in the relationship. And so I can say from my experience, gratefully in my marriage, my husband understands that. And you know, now we're in a position where it's more equal. But in the beginning it wasn't. And I never felt for a moment that I was in some kind of additional power or control, nor did he ever feel like he had to overcompensate. He was always secure and confident in his position to be Purusha, or the masculine figure in the marriage. And yes, Shruti, your level of income isn't the only thing that defines success in life. Snaps again, it's true. I hope that helps.
But just speaking to that specific question, in that specific scenario, I will say on a very practical level, it will involve like the male being very secure in their identity and secure in themselves makes a tremendous difference for that situation to be successful.
Yeah, it's a good question. And if you're in a male body and that would make you feel insecure, no one's going to blame you because you're living in a world that programs you to think that you should feel insecure for that. But let's talk about it if you're comfortable. Maybe reach out to Rasishra or to myself and we can talk about it because it's not healthy. It's not healthy for you or for your partner.
I know someone was wondering whether there's any books or resources that they can refer to further enhance their understanding of what you guys spoke about today. So I'm wondering if any of you or if both of you can share that.
Yeah, did you, Radha Bhakti, did you want to start?
No, you know what, you can say them and I'll type them in the chat for people.
Okay, sure. So I'll start off with, first of all, with our Prabhupada's book, Shastric References. I will say that, you know, Bhagavad Gita and the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that if you are to read these, it will be greatly enhanced, as Radha Bhakti mentioned, to do this with mentors or with some guidance to be able to understand specifically the context. Because, you know, the way we should approach Shastra is we should see what's in Shastra. We should see how our teachers have applied it, right? So our gurus and our teachers, how they've applied it. And then the third piece is how we should see of all the things that they've been applied, how does that relevant to me and my nature, right? So that's kind of the framework that I want everyone to look at, specifically Shastra, not just the words on the page, but how it's been applied by our seniors and our gurus, and then what of that is relevant to my specific situation. So third canto of Bhagavad Gita, as I mentioned, Spiritual Warrior 2, which is by Bhakti Tirtha Swami, is an excellent book. The Four Pillars of Dharma by Jagannath Eshwari Devi Dasi is an excellent book. I have a couple of here. There's also one, Heart and Soul Connection. This is by the Grahastha Vision team, which is excellent. And this is a very practical book for those not only who are looking to approach Grahastha Ashram, but also if you're in Grahastha Ashram as well. There are also very much great lessons to be learned from Sri Chanakya Niti. This book is by Patita Pavana Prabhu. So those are some of our spiritual references. And then at the beginning, I mentioned some of the secular ones that I think serve us well are Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Conscious Men. Both of these are by John Gray. And I do think that there's a lot to be learned from the 5 love languages as well.
Thank you. And I know Dylan has his hand up, so.
Just had a quick question. So I don't know how it works in Canada and around the world, but in the UK, generally we exchange forms with potential partners. And I was just wondering in a scenario, just to give an example, that, say, for example, a woman might put that she doesn't mind being with a male who's younger. And yeah, people have their own different criteria. But say, for example, we may look at science or Vedically that actually it's better if the man is older. So in those cases, should we just free willingly accept that this person's put what they put down? Or should we think about kind of almost educating them, or just giving them another point of view that actually, are you sure about that because of X, Y, Z? Just wondering how you go about that with different scenarios, like the example of income, for example, as well.
You're speaking about as an advisor to one of those people who submits one of those forms, or as a potential partner, or both?
Both. Like, well, I guess I guess receiving a form from a person that says that they don't mind if
yes. Okay.
They just don't know about the different reasons.
Okay. I can start, Riseshwar.
Yeah, do.
I think that there are always exceptions, and while it's shastric that typically the man should be older than the woman, there are always exceptions to the rule. And I think it just requires intelligence on both sides to see if the level of intellect and maturity matches and is compatible. So I am 5 years older to my husband, and we were matched by senior devotees who knew us well and who were able to attest that we could be a nice intellectual match for each other, probably because I'm super immature, but also because I make fun of him and call him an 85-year-old man because he's super, super high and elevated in my opinion. So I don't think that somebody should turn someone away because of age. I think that they should be open to understanding more about the person because there are exceptions. So it's also said in material science that girls tend to advance more than men, or faster rather than men. So these are considerations. But again, under the guidance of senior devotees and by inquiring further, I think that it can work. And I also think sometimes it won't. So there's no like sweeping generalization or rule. Riseshwar, what would you add?
Yeah, Dylan, I mean, it's a really good question, and I've definitely been in situations like this before myself. And just reflecting on what Bhuta Bhavana has shared with me over the years is that there's competing factors, right? Like, let's say find the woman is older, but perhaps things that may offset it is, let's say, their level of education, or perhaps their spiritual maturity, or even like what their the type of job they have, and what kind of income they may have, right? Again, these can all be things that balance out the situation. So it's this is one specific point you brought up, and the age thing is it's not a small thing. It's definitely there because we do know that that's generally the recommendation. But I think then you have to look at the other major, pieces that will contribute to the relationship to see if it can be offset. And then ultimately, I think that the more, the overlying factor is the more two people are devotees and Krishna conscious, more of the external considerations can be, worked through.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Dylan?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have been going on for 2 hours. So I think, and Radha Bhakti, we just want to be respectful of everyone's time.
I just want to say that if anybody else has a question, we want to hear it. But we also I know that I don't want anybody to feel like they can't drop because it's been 2 hours. So please, we just want to be aware of that.
Yeah, and I believe both Radha Bhakti and Riseshwar Madhav Prabhu's emails are on the group chat. So if you can't find them, we'll send them out again. But yeah, if there are no further questions, I'm not seeing anyone's hands raised or any other questions. So we're just going to go ahead and thank both our speakers for taking out both of their times. And the one point that came to me, I was taking some notes, was that it was I don't know if everyone else on the video on the chat agrees, but it was such a breath of fresh air because it was so real and so candid. It wasn't like, yeah, this is the ideal, but you both presented the ideal, but you also presented the realistic situation. There was a concept of, there was an honest discussion going on, which I really appreciated, because oftentimes we can be used to just hearing what is ideal and then following that without acknowledging what is possible and what is real, given our position. So thank you both so much for that. Really grateful that you could spend some time with us today. And thank you all for who attended, because we weren't sure who was going to attend this talk, because it was just maybe just perceived as a repetition. But I hope everyone who attended, we were able to deliver something that was valuable, that you were going to use to better your spiritual life and your relationships going forward. So if everyone can just unmute and just give our speakers very loud Haribol. It's going to be disjointed, but we'll do it anyways. Haribol!
Haribol! Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, you guys. It was a lot of fun to do this, and we really appreciated trying to take this information and to have a relevant conversation on topics that sometimes don't maybe get spoken about so much, but that we're trying to use this forum to bring out discussions like this so that we can all learn and uplift all of us. So thank you for giving us that opportunity.
There you go, everybody. Thank you.
Haribol. Bye-bye.
Everyone.